Jordan Valley Water provides water in Salt Lake County, and I am here today representing Prepare 60, an organization, a group created by the 4 largest water districts in Utah: Jordan Valley in Salt Lake County, Weber Basin to the north, Central Utah, and Washington County. Almost 90% of Utahns live within our boundaries of these 4 districts. And so we have undertaken some statewide planning and some important advocacy and education opportunities. We created Prepare 60 to create a 50-year planning horizon from the year 2010 to 2060. That's where the 60 comes from, to show that we can do it, that we can be prepared, and what it would take to keep pace with our doubling of our population and our rapidly growing economy. Our economy and our lifestyle that are the envy of the nation, and our ability to accommodate our growing population, our children and grandchildren, to stay here in Utah. And so Prepare 60 was created to secure Utah's economic future because of the strong tie between the economy and a growing water supply. And to do that by protecting what we have, using it wisely, and providing for the future. Let me talk briefly about water supply and scarcity in Utah. There's not enough water in Utah to do all that we want to do. In fact, Utah is the 2nd most arid state in the nation. You've heard that, and that's based on average precipitation per square mile throughout the whole state. It's really not as bad as it seems, because our pioneer ancestors luckily had the foresight to develop mostly on mountain fronts where there is more water. Still, there's not enough water supply to do everything we want to do. For that reason, the Utah legislature, upon statehood, declared that all water in Utah belongs to the public as a property, and the right to use water would be based on water right laws that became the model for all the western states. The model water rights laws, known as the Prior Appropriation Doctrine, are based on first in time, first in right, which means a priority date is a very important element of a water right. And they're based on beneficial use, so that a water right holder who doesn't use his or her water for more than 7 years is subject to having that forfeited from him and going to the next water right holder. In Utah, these pie charts show how much water we receive: 61 million acre feet per year on average. And that we receive it from the sky. It just falls as rain and snow. These charts show where it's used. In other words, how it's used and depleted. Depleted means it goes back up into the sky and floats away to Colorado. This shows that, pie chart shows that 88.7% plus 3.8 plus 2.2 support our natural systems, the natural environment. That means 94% of all the water that Utah receives each year is in and sustains the environment, natural systems. The way it does that is the water that melts from snow and that falls as rain is conveyed through surface streams, or it moves underground through aquifers, ultimately making its way to root systems of plants and trees. And the water then comes from the roots, travels up by osmosis through the stem of plants and vegetation, through the trunks of trees, ultimately coming to the foliage, the leaves. And then at the leaf, it's released, instantaneously evaporating in a process that's called transpiration. It transpires. That's where most of the water is depleted in Utah from the natural systems. Some is depleted from surface reservoirs, surface lakes, Great Salt Lake, Utah Lake, evaporating back into the sky. Importantly, though, on this pie chart, of all the water used in Utah, the 4.5% used on farms for agriculture, the 0.8%, less than 1%, used for municipal systems, that is the amount of water diverted out of natural streams, then becoming subject to Utah's water rights laws. And the reason I'm only going to talk now about the 0.8% municipal water, less than 1%, is because that's where 99% of all dollars are spent. That's where the infrastructure is so costly that supports our wonderful lifestyle, our growing economy, and our growing population. Very important. Where does the water come from in your communities? It varies throughout the state. Commonly it's captured far away and imported into a river basin or a population center. In Salt Lake County, for example, only a fourth of the water that our population needs originates in Salt Lake County. The other 3/4 is imported distantly from the Provo, the Weber, even the Duchesne River on the other side of the Uinta Mountains, brought through the mountains through tunnels into the Provo River, stored in reservoirs behind dams. And that storage is so important, again, for our lifestyle, for our summertime peak demands. Then delivered, conveyed through aqueduct systems, which are large diameter pipelines, tunnels, 6, 8, 10 feet more in diameter, bringing them to population centers, to treatment plants. The water is then purified through water treatment plants. An example is the Jordan Valley Water Treatment Plant, the largest in Utah, in Harriman, which treats water at up to 180 million gallons per day. And then it's delivered through large diameter water transmission pipelines throughout a population center to distribution systems. Commonly, your cities and your towns will operate those distribution systems. And commonly, a regional entity like a water conservancy district will deliver it to your boundaries. So you can then distribute it to all the end users, the homeowners, the businesses. And that relationship that you have with the end users is very important in a moment as we talk about water conservation. So on average, water travels over 100 miles. And there's over 10,000 miles of large diameter water transmission pipelines in Utah, which is becoming a large challenge in maintaining that aging infrastructure. Let me talk for just a minute now about roles, and this is covered more fully on pages 3 and 4 and 7 and 8 of the manual, but let me touch on some important topics. I've been talking about drinking water. Sometimes it's called culinary water. More appropriately, it's called potable water, from the Latin to drink. And that forms the municipal or the urban water systems that I'm talking to you about that are so important for your distribution within your city boundaries. And in some of our areas, there is only one set of infrastructure, a primary infrastructure, that delivers potable culinary water. In some areas, such as in Weber and Davis counties especially, there are two infrastructure sets, a primary for drinking water and a secondary that delivers untreated water for outdoor irrigation. The entities that deal with these are, well, let me first mention the federal government. The federal government over the last century has financed 1/3 of all infrastructure in Utah, water infrastructure in Utah. And that's been a big benefit to us, even though it's fully repaid by Utah water users with interest. But the hundreds of millions, the billions of dollars of upfront financing were provided by the federal government. The federal government's in rapid retreat from that position. They're not going to be financing any new water infrastructure. In fact, the federal government agencies on dealing with water have less than 5% of the dollars needed to repair and replace all of this infrastructure, the third throughout Utah that they built, shifting the roles and responsibilities to the state and local. The state, you'll find, deals with water regulating and planning in 4 divisions: the Division of Water Rights, Division of Water Resources, Division of Drinking Water, and Division of Water Quality. I deal with those divisions a lot. You won't deal with them that much, except the Division of Water Rights, with your own city and town water rights, and with annual water use reports that are very important that you give attention to. At the local level, the financing for the doubling of our population is going to shift from here to the state and especially locally. Much of the financing locally will be done by water conservancy districts or metropolitan water districts that operate as wholesale providers in their regional roles. And they will have contracts with cities and towns which form the retail, the distribution network and market as you sell and deliver and sell water to residents and businesses within your city. Those retail entities, in addition to cities and towns, could include improvement districts, irrigation districts, or special service districts. The teamwork is then very important. Those different layers are discussed on page 9 of your manual. Now let me talk about some important long-term planning issues. With water, long-term planning is very important because the water infrastructure has to be built and operating before you issue building permits. It can't be built, it can't slightly be lagging. And it takes decades to develop new water supplies. For that reason, we created Prepare 60 to create a 50-year planning horizon and provide a statewide plan and to advocate how financing can be done. The reason we called ourselves Prepare 60 is we used 2010 to 2060 as the 50-year interval, and we are showing through a plan how we can keep up with population growth and continue sustaining our growing economy and not fall behind, what actions need to be taken year by year, where, and how much they'll cost. One of the important findings that we found after creating a statewide water infrastructure plan for 50 years, incidentally, you can look at that on prepare60.org or prepare60.com. We found that the overall cost will be $15 billion for new supply and infrastructure, but more than that, $18 billion to repair and replace our existing, our aging infrastructure. That is a very important issue in terms of long-term planning because it is so easy to fall behind and not give attention to funding of repair and replacement of water infrastructure. It's underground generally, it's out of sight, and you can just wait until pipes start to leak. But once a city gets behind, it is very difficult to catch up. It's so important that the legislature enacted a law requiring the 4 largest water districts, Prepare 60, to enact formal capital asset management plans and requiring that we study what the cost will be to replace our infrastructure at the pace that its useful life ends, so we don't fall behind, and requiring that the boards of trustees fund reserve funds to keep pace with funding. The sponsor said that he was planning on the 4 districts being test cases, guinea pigs, for the rest of the state, hoping that cities and towns will follow suit, but noting that the time will come if cities and towns don't, the legislature will then enact mandatory requirements on cities and towns. So this is an area you want to really get attention to.
I was going to say, historically, a lot of cities who've been in the water delivery business, coming from a metro township that is not in the water delivery business, we have Magna Water to do it. One of the challenges has been, because of it being an enterprise nature, but also a capital creating nature, there's been a very hard political shift over the years to actually take money from this enterprise and use it to fund other general forms of governance. So if you're in a city that's doing that, you might want to take a good hard look at it per the guidance of Mr. Bay here, because over time, more than likely that will, if you don't do it on your own and already be headed in that, or at least be headed in that direction, they're going to come back and get you.
I agree, not only for repair and replacement, but even the practice of excessively transferring enterprise fund water funds into the general fund has been criticized recently by the legislative auditor. And in California, a court case is making its way that says that only the cost of delivering water can be assessed by a public agency. You can't artificially increase it by transfers to general funds, for example. So something to look out for. Let me comment on another important long-term planning issue, and that is being more efficient through water conservation. This is something you're also going to want to give attention to. The reason is that there is no land use jurisdiction authority given to water districts. It totally rests with cities, towns, and counties. So I'd recommend that you form a good partnership, a good relationship with your regional water provider. In Utah, what we find is that over 60% of the municipal water is delivered outdoors to lawns and gardens, and less than 40% indoors. That means that the greatest opportunity for savings, efficiency gains, is in outdoor water, landscape water. And we are showing, Prepare 60, our districts are showing through demonstration gardens how homeowners can use half or less of the water they're using outdoors and convert to a landscape that still is lush, beautiful, green, doesn't have to be desert landscaped at all, just more efficient. And we need to move our public to a new ethic, a new culture of being more conscious and more efficient with water. It's being done through voluntary conservation measures such as education, demonstration gardens, through managed conservation, including water rate structures that you will set that give a price signal and give incentive to be more efficient, and moving to mandatory conservation measures that would especially include landscape ordinances that only cities and towns or counties could enact. And so it's very important that we conserve and meet our statewide goal of 25% reduction in per capita water use by the year 2025. In Jordan Valley's service area, we started in the year 2000. We're about 2/3 of the way there, and it's getting more and more difficult, meaning that we need to partner with our cities more and more.
Did you do that through managed conservation or mandatory?
Through the cities we'd do it through both. The managed, commonly the city would set the price structure, such as a tiered structure with increasing unit prices for more wasteful water, and then the city would also do it through enacting ordinances. But the water districts can provide model ordinances, recommendations.
But to get to that, but you said you were trying to get to that 25% and you're getting close to it, but what do you think made the difference? How did you get to?
We've gotten 2/3 of the way through starting just with voluntary conservation, through classes, through demonstration garden, through Slow the Flow program, and through grant programs to our member cities. And then we've moved more into managed with with price structures where we provide retail water. And that's kind of where we're at now.
I was going to say one of the easiest ones the city can do is passing an ordinance that basically says you don't do outdoor watering only between May 1 and October 1, and that's the easiest one for those guys to manage. In the case of water agencies that have not had that on it, though, I can tell you the first year they're going to scream, because all of a sudden they're going to see water use drop because folks save money. You know, that because folks who are normally watering past October into November, December will stop watering.
But is there some kind of weird balance though? Because you want people to conserve so you don't use as much water, but there's a certain price that's with the infrastructure, right? Yes,
if you go too fast,
right,
you end up running short of money. And what we find is that 90% of the costs are fixed in nature, and only 10% are variable on how much water you use. And so For us, it's worked as long as we're in a growth mode to conserve at about the pace of growth. And for us, it's been about 1% per year. So that's a way for you to do it as the city is gradual, not such a sudden impact that it'll rob you of the funds you need. And then you can also provide for those funds through the rate structure that you set up. Okay, just a couple final observations. It's important to do long-term planning for water because it makes sense financially. In your cities, as you develop and with businesses, every dollar spent on water infrastructure generates $6 in economic product returns in the community. Water districts operate on a funding model that includes these three sources of funding. User charges assessed through water rates, and so water districts or cities. Water districts then also would have impact fee authority and property tax within limits set by the legislature. The property taxes help when you're in a strong growth mode, like our service area, and in particular, they also help pay for the public good aspect of water that isn't measured through water meters, but provides recreation, endangered species, environmental enhancements, flood control, groundwater protection, fire protection, and increased land value where there are entitlements to land not yet developed, knowing that a water supply is available for it. Hope this has been helpful to you. You can find out more on prepare60.org, prepare60.com in this manual or by contacting us.